An unwinding shift and an unexpected obstacle. The last call of my 16-hour shift finally wrapped, and the familiar ache in my shoulders told me it was time to clock out. As Sheriff DeAndre Mills, I'd seen it all today: a fender bender on Main Street, a lost dog reunited with its tearful owner, and even a particularly stubborn squirrel in Mrs. Henderson's chimney. Each incident, no matter how minor, demanded a piece of my focus, a sliver of my patience. The badge, the uniform, the ever-present radio crackling with dispatches, they were extensions of me. But after 16 hours, I craved the quiet detachment of my own home. My mind drifted to the simple pleasures awaiting me, the satisfying weight of fresh groceries in my hands, the comforting sizzle of a home-cooked meal on the stove, and finally, the rhythmic creak of my porch swing as the day's last light faded. These weren't just luxuries. They were necessities for recharging after spending so much of myself on the community. The drive home was a mental transition, shedding the weight of my responsibilities with each mile. I consciously relaxed my grip on the steering wheel, my gaze softening from the perpetual scan for trouble to the familiar landmarks of my neighborhood. The thought of my own bed, unburdened by the weight of a duty belt, was a powerful motivator. I pictured the satisfying clink of ice in a glass of lemonade, the quiet hum of my refrigerator, and the blissful silence that only a truly peaceful home can offer. Today, I wasn't the sheriff. I was just DeAndre, a man looking forward to a well-deserved break. The idea of slipping into a worn pair of jeans and a comfortable t-shirt, completely anonymous and unburdened, was almost intoxicating. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under my tires a welcome sound. My house, a modest two-story with a welcoming porch, looked more inviting than usual. I cut the engine, the sudden silence, a stark contrast to the constant chatter of the police radio. Reaching for the 2 heavy grocery bags on the passenger seat, I savored the anticipation of unpacking them, of transforming raw ingredients into a comforting meal. My arms were already protesting the weight, a testament to the long hours and the unexpected detours my day had taken. As I pushed open the car door, my gaze instinctively swept across my yard, a habit ingrained after years. In law enforcement, it was then that I saw him. He was standing at the bottom of my steps, a figure of entitled arrogance, blocking my path as if he owned the very air I breathed. My peaceful day off, it seemed, was about to be put on hold. The sight of him, Karen's son, instantly triggered a familiar ripple of annoyance. I'd seen him around before, a constant fixture of disruption in the neighborhood. His white tank top and flip-flops, combined with the sunglasses perched on his forehead like a prop in a bad reality show, solidified his self-important aura. He exuded an air of casual disregard for everyone and everything around him. His presence was a stark contrast to the quiet solitude I had envisioned for my evening. I tightened my grip on the grocery bags, a subconscious preparation for the inevitable interaction. My mind, still in off-duty mode, tried to rationalize his presence, to find an innocent explanation for him loitering at the foot of my steps. Perhaps he was waiting for a friend, or simply cutting through. But the way he stood, legs splayed, arms crossed, suggested a deliberate obstruction. It wasn't just his physical presence. It was the entire posture, the underlying message of entitlement that radiated from him. This wasn't a neighborly encounter. This was a challenge. My mental checklist for de-escalation, usually reserved for tense situations on duty, briefly flickered through my mind. But this was my home, my time, and a civilian interaction. I reminded myself to stay calm, to approach the situation with the same measured demeanor I would apply to any citizen encounter, even if this particular citizen was a known nuisance. The weight of the groceries in my arms became a symbol of my desired peace, a tangible representation of the quiet evening I was being denied. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable confrontation, silently wishing for the simplicity of a lost dog or a stubborn squirrel. I took a step forward, a silent invitation for him to move, to acknowledge my presence and clear my path. But he remained rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on the grocery bags in my arms. Then he spoke, his voice dripping with an arrogance that curdled my attempt at a peaceful transition into my off-duty life. "Hand over the bags," he demanded, his tone flat, devoid of any politeness or hint of a question. At first I genuinely thought he was joking. My brain, still processing the transition from intense police work to the mundane task of grocery unpacking, struggled to reconcile his demand with reality. Was this some bizarre neighborhood prank? Had I missed a memo about a local tradition I wasn't aware of? Small internal alarm bell, however, began to chime. The humor in his voice was absent, replaced by a chillingly serious conviction. My initial thought quickly dissipated as he elaborated the true nature of his audacity, revealing itself. "We're throwing a pool party," he stated, as if that explained everything, as if his immediate desire for snacks superseded my right to my own property. "You look like the delivery guy," he continued, his eyes scanning my casual clothes, the absence of my uniform clearly signaling to him a person of lesser standing. "You can drop those off out back." That's when it clicked. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place, forming an undeniable, infuriating picture. This wasn't confusion on his part. This wasn't a misunderstanding of social graces or a simple lack of awareness. This was entitlement, pure and unadulterated, born from a deeply ingrained sense of superiority. And beneath that entitlement, simmering just beneath the surface, was racism. It oozed from his sunburnt mouth with every syllable, a bitter taste in the air. He didn't recognize me in my casual clothes, stripped of the uniform that commanded respect. And because he didn't recognize the sheriff, he certainly didn't respect the man, DeAndre Mills, standing before him. In his eyes, I was merely a figure of service, an anonymous helper to be commanded. Not a homeowner, not a neighbor, and certainly not an authority figure. My immediate response was a firm, unequivocal no. The word hung in the air, a stark refusal that seemed to genuinely surprise him. His brow furrowed, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face, before it contorted into a mask of pure indignation. And that's when the meltdown started. His casual stance shifted to an aggressive posture, stepped closer, invading my personal space. His voice rising in volume, escalating from demanding to outright yelling. His hands, like predatory claws, reached out, attempting to snatch the grocery bags from my hands. It was a brazen act, a blatant disregard for my person and my property. The audacity of it was almost comical, if it weren't so infuriating. He launched into a tirade, a litany of grievances and misguided claims of authority. "My mom runs this neighborhood," he bellowed, a childish declaration of dominion that would have been laughable in any other context. Then came the truly egregious statement, one that solidified the racial undertones of his aggression. "This house used to belong to people who knew how to follow the rules," he sneered, his gaze sweeping over my home, implying that my very presence here was a violation of some unspoken racially motivated code. His words were a direct assault on my right to be in my own home, a thinly veiled assertion that people like me didn't belong in their neighborhood. The thinly veiled threats continued, escalating in absurdity. "If you don't hand them over," he warned, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and childish desperation, "I'll call the cops." The irony was thick, a bitter taste on my tongue. He, the instigator of a potential theft, was threatening to call the very people he was in the process of offending. And then, the final audacious insult, he called my job on me. I felt a smile, slow and deliberate, spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but one of grim satisfaction. He was digging his own grave, completely oblivious to the identity of the man he was so carelessly disrespecting.
Ow.
The uniform was off, the badge tucked away, but the sheriff was still very much present, and his patience was wearing thin. A slow, deliberate smile stretched across my face. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but one of grim satisfaction. He had just threatened to call the police on the sheriff. The sheer audacity, the profound ignorance of his actions, was almost theatrical. This was no longer just about my groceries or a rude neighbor. It was about the fundamental disrespect for authority and the thinly veiled bigotry that had fueled his entire outburst. Without a word, I turned, walking past him as if he were nothing. more than a particularly annoying obstacle. The weight of the groceries in my arms felt heavier now, not from their physical mass, but from the symbolic weight of the situation. I stepped into my cool, quiet house, the momentary reprieve, a welcome contrast to the simmering tension outside. I gently placed the bags on the kitchen counter, soft thud of produce against laminate, a stark reminder of the peaceful evening I had envisioned, but peace, it seemed, would have to wait. My next movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. I walked directly to the hall closet where my off-duty gear was stored. My fingers found the familiar coolness of the badge. Its metallic weight, a comforting presence in my palm. I pinned it to my shirt, the glint of the silver, a silent declaration of my true identity. Next, the off-duty holster secured to my belt. The familiar weight of my sidearm, a reassuring promise of self-preservation, though I sincerely hoped it wouldn't come to that. As I geared up, a transformation occurred, not just in my outward appearance, but in my internal state. The Deandra who craved quiet and relaxation receded, replaced by the honed professional persona of Sheriff DeAndre Mills. My patience, already stretched thin by the day's demands and his audacious behavior, evaporated completely. I walked back out, the screen door closing with a soft thud behind me, its sound a subtle punctuation mark to my return. His face, which moments before had been contorted in childish rage, underwent a dramatic transformation. It drained of all color, turning the pallid shade of drywall, the freckles that dotted his nose now standing out in stark relief. His mouth, which had been spewing insults and demands, gaped open slightly, a silent testament to his sudden, profound shock. The sunglasses still perched on his forehead seemed to mock his sudden vulnerability. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Slowly registering the glint of the badge, the outline of the holstered weapon, the sudden shift in my demeanor. The realization dawned on him, slowly at first, then with a crushing weight. The delivery. Guy, the rule breaker, the man he had so casually disrespected, was the very authority he had threatened to summon. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I stared back at him, my expression unreadable. The silence stretched between us, thick with his dawning comprehension. Then I spoke, my voice calm but firm, each word enunciated with deliberate precision. I asked him to repeat everything he'd just said now, to a sheriff. The command hung in the air, a direct challenge. His composure, already teetering, shattered completely. He instinctively backed up a step, his bravado replaced by palpable fear. He stammered a jumble of incoherent apologies and desperate attempts to retract his earlier statements. Confused, he mumbled, his voice a pathetic squeak. Just playing. He tried to salvage the lie transparent and pathetic. His voice cracked like glass under pressure, a clear indicator of his fear and humiliation. The power had shifted completely, and he, the self-proclaimed ruler of the neighborhood, was now nothing more than a terrified, cornered child. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done with its theatrical reveal. Just then, as if on cue, a new wave of chaos approached. 4 of his friends, equally disheveled and oblivious, came stumbling up the driveway. Their arrival was punctuated by the sight of a stolen patio umbrella, unmistakably from my neighbor's yard. Its bright colors a glaring testament to their illicit activities. One of them, oblivious to the unfolding drama, was already in the process of opening a bottle of liquor, a clear indication of their underage indulgence. They froze, a collective deer-in-headlights tableau, their eyes widening as they registered my presence, my badge, my holstered weapon, and the terrified expression on their friend's face. One of them, the quick-witted coward of the group, tried to turn around and walk off, hoping to simply melt back into the anonymity from which he had emerged. But it was too late. The scene was set, the evidence laid bare, and the sheriff was now fully engaged. The peaceful evening I had envisioned was officially a distant memory, placed by the satisfying reality of justice about to be served. The attempting escape by one of his friends was a futile gesture, pathetic scramble for anonymity that only highlighted their collective guilt. Too late, I stated, my voice cutting through the sudden, stunned silence that had descended upon my driveway. The air, thick with the scent of cheap liquor and the unspoken anxieties of the group, seemed to vibrate with the tension. My hand went to my radio, a familiar and reassuring weight against my hip. I called dispatch, I announced. Not for their benefit, but for the record. Ensuring that every subsequent action would be documented official. Not because I needed backup, I clarified, my gaze sweeping over the suddenly contrite faces before me, but because I was filing this officially. The words hung in the air. Clear declaration that this was no longer a personal dispute, but a matter for law enforcement, with all the accompanying repercussions. Their faces, already pale, seemed to drain of even more color. The earlier bravado of Karen's son had completely dissipated, replaced by a defeated slump. His friends, caught red-handed, stood frozen, their stolen patio umbrella, a glaring monument to their misdeeds. The bottle of liquor, still uncorked in one of their hands, was now a damning piece of evidence rather than a celebratory prop. The minute hand on my watch seemed to tick with an exaggerated slowness, each second bringing the inevitable closer. The silence was finally broken by the distant, then rapidly approaching wail of sirens. The sound, so familiar to me, brought a sense of vindication. Within 15 minutes, 3 squad cars pulled up to my driveway, their lights flashing in, a silent, urgent rhythm. The sudden influx of law enforcement personnel transformed my quiet residential street into an active crime scene. The officers, recognizing their sheriff, nodded respectfully, their expressions transitioning from inquiry to understanding as they took in the situation. I briefly relayed the sequence of events, from the initial demand for my groceries to the discovery of the stolen umbrella and the underage drinking. As I spoke, one of the arriving officers mentioned something that brought a slight curl to my lip. "Turns out," he began, his voice low, "this pool party of his was already being investigated." My eyebrows rose slightly. It seemed Karen's son and his friends had been busy. They'd been reported for noise complaints, stolen items, and even underage drinking. The information solidified the picture of a group of habitual troublemakers, their brazen behavior finally catching up to them. And I, the unwitting target of their latest scheme, had just provided the final, undeniable proof. It was a satisfying turn of events, a perfect storm of their own making. The irony of them calling the police on me only to have the police arrive for them was not lost on me. As the officers began to systematically question the group, the atmosphere grew even tenser. The friends, who had been so emboldened by their numbers earlier, now stammered and avoided eye contact, their attempts at denial crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Then, as if the universe couldn't resist one more dramatic entrance, Karen herself arrived. Her bathrobe was barely tied, her hair a wild mess, and her face contorted in a mask of outrage. She burst onto the scene like a theatrical storm, her voice piercing the air. "You set my son up," she shrieked, her eyes darting between me and the uniformed officers. "You should be ashamed for turning on the community." Her accusations were baseless, fueled by a mother's blind loyalty and a complete disregard for the facts. Her words were a desperate attempt to deflect blame, to paint her son as a victim and me as the aggressor. She continued her tirade, oblivious to the growing number of officers and the serious nature of the situation. Her voice rose in pitch, bordering on hysteria, her arms flailing wildly as she gestured wildly at me. Ow. It was a spectacle, a public display of denial and misplaced anger. But her performance was cut short. One of the officers, a seasoned veteran with a calm demeanor, stepped forward, his voice a steady counterpoint to her screeching. He merely stated, simply and clearly, "Ma'am, you do realize this is Sheriff DeAndre Mills, the elected sheriff of the entire county?" The words, delivered with quiet authority, hit her like a physical blow. The sudden realization of who I was, of the true power dynamic at play, caused her to visibly deflate. Her mouth snapped shut, her arms dropped to her sides, and the angry flush on her face slowly receded, replaced by a ghastly pallor. Her screaming stopped dead in its tracks. The full weight of her son's actions and her own misguided defense had finally dawned on her. The public display of her son's entitlement and her own fierce, unfounded accusations had just backfired spectacularly. Karen's sudden silence was a tangible thing, a vacuum in the air, where her indignant screams had been moments before. The officer's simple statement, "Ma'am, you do realize this is Sheriff DeAndre Mills, the elected sheriff of the entire county?" had landed with the force of a physical blow. Her face, which had been contorted with rage, now sagged, all color draining from it. The reality of the situation, the true identity of the man her son had just verbally assaulted and attempted to rob, finally registered with crushing weight. Her blind fury dissolved into a pathetic whimper, a stark contrast to her earlier theatrical display. She stared at me, then at her son, then back at me, as if seeing us clearly for the first time. The gravity of the situation, no longer just a pool party, but a full-blown criminal investigation, settled over her like a suffocating blanket. The sight of her son, slumped and terrified, alongside his equally subdued friends, was a clear testament to the rapidly unfolding consequences of their actions. The officers, meanwhile, wasted no time. They were methodical, professional, and efficient. The stolen patio umbrella, still clutched by one of the friends, was immediately secured as evidence. The partially opened bottle of liquor was confiscated, its contents a clear violation of underage drinking laws. One of the officers, a younger man named Officer Miller, began systematically questioning each of the individuals, his notepad ready, his pen scratching quietly as he documented their responses. Another officer, Officer Davies, began a perimeter check, his gaze sweeping over the yard. His experience leading him to look for other signs of illicit activity. It wasn't long before their thoroughness paid off. Behind a large shrub near the side of the house, Officer Davies discovered a cooler, its lid slightly ajar. A quick peek inside revealed a trove of stolen goods, an entire collection of groceries, suspiciously similar to the items Karen's son had demanded from me, along with a Bluetooth speaker that clearly didn't belong to them. The cooler itself looked like it had been recently pilfered from someone's porch. The discovery solidified the narrative. This wasn't just a spontaneous act of entitlement, but a pattern of premeditated theft. The group had been systematically targeting homes, collecting items for their pool party with blatant disregard for the law and other people's property. The implications were clear. Karen's son wasn't just a rude kid. He was part of a larger criminal enterprise, albeit a small-scale one. As the officers continued their investigation, another critical piece of information emerged. After running the names of the friends through dispatch, two of them were found to have outstanding warrants. One for a minor assault charge, the other for petty theft from a convenience store a few towns over. These weren't just mischievous teenagers. They were individuals with a history of delinquent behavior. Their current actions just another entry in their growing rap sheets. The situation escalated from a simple neighborhood dispute to a full-blown criminal roundup. The atmosphere on my driveway, which had been buzzing with the initial shock and indignation, now settled into a grim determination as the officers worked tirelessly. Each piece of evidence, each confirmed warrant, built a stronger case against the group. Karen, watching her son and his friends being systematically processed by law enforcement, seemed to shrink further into herself. Her earlier bravado had completely dissipated, replaced by a dawning horror. The reality of her son facing serious charges, the public humiliation, and the undeniable proof of his criminal behavior were clearly weighing heavily on her. Her silence was now one of shame and regret, a stark contrast to the indignant rage she had displayed just moments earlier. The hour crawled by, punctuated by the terse radio communications of the officers and the occasional hushed conversations as they compiled their findings. The stolen items were cataloged, photographs were taken, and statements were collected. The sheer volume of evidence against Karen's son and his friends was overwhelming. It was clear that this wasn't just a one-off incident. It was the culmination of a pattern of behavior that had finally caught up to them. The pool party had truly gone from a planned celebration to an unexpected police bust. The hour-long ordeal on my driveway felt both agonizingly slow and surprisingly swift. As the last pieces of evidence were secured and the final statements taken, the officers moved to make the arrests. The air, which had been thick with tension, now hummed with the quiet efficiency of law enforcement at work. Karen's son, whose earlier arrogance had been replaced by a pale, quivering fear, was the first to be formally placed in handcuffs. The cold click of the metal sounded stark in the residential quiet. He offered no resistance, his spirit completely broken. The charges were read to him, clear and concise. Attempted theft, for his brazen attempt to snatch my groceries. Obstruction, for actively blocking my path and refusing to move. And disorderly conduct for his public tirade and aggressive behavior. Each charge was a direct consequence of his actions. Stark reminder that his entitlement had finally collided with the uncompromising wall of the law. He stared blankly ahead, his eyes devoid of their earlier spark, his youthful defiance replaced by a heavy sense of defeat. It was a sobering sight, even for me. Next, the two friends with outstanding warrants were apprehended. Their attempts at feigning ignorance were quickly shut down by the officers who had clearly verified their identities. One was wanted for a petty theft from a local hardware store, the other for unpaid fines related to a string of traffic violations. Their casual participation in the pool party had inadvertently led to their capture, testament to the unpredictable nature of justice. They, too, offered no resistance, their earlier attempts to flee or deny their involvement long forgotten. The remaining friends, though not facing immediate arrest, were thoroughly questioned. Their names and information taken and given stern warnings about their association with criminal activity. The stash of stolen liquor, the Bluetooth speaker, from someone else's yard, the entire cooler full of groceries, clearly taken from another victim's porch earlier that day, were all meticulously cataloged and placed into evidence bags. The sheer volume of pilfered items painted a damning picture of a group that routinely engaged in theft. Exploiting the trust and property of their neighbors was a stark revelation that their pool party was merely a front for their illicit activities. Karen, now utterly deflated, stood by, a silent witness to her son's downfall. Her earlier aggression had completely dissipated, replaced by a visible anguish. The sight of her son in handcuffs, surrounded by uniformed officers, was clearly a profound shock. She made no further protests, no more accusations. The reality of the situation had finally pierced through her maternal denial. The community she had claimed I was turning on was actually the very entity I was protecting, and her son was the one who had violated its peace and security. The irony of her earlier accusations hung heavy in the air, a silent testament to her misguided loyalty. The officers, having completed their work, began to prepare for departure. The scene that had unfolded in my driveway would become another entry in the daily logs, another case closed. For me, however, it was more than just a case. It was a profound illustration of the consequences of entitlement, racism, and a blatant disregard for the law. It was a reminder that even when off-duty, the principles of justice and order are always paramount. The last of the evidence was loaded into the patrol cars. The suspects were escorted into the back seats. And with a final nod of acknowledgement from the lead officer, the 3 squad cars slowly rolled off my driveway, their flashing lights disappearing down the street. The wail of their sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind a profound silence that was now truly peaceful. The setting sun cast long shadows across my yard, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. The stolen umbrella was gone. The empty liquor bottle no longer a symbol of revelry, but of lawlessness. My driveway, which had been a stage for arrogance and confrontation, was now simply my driveway again. As the last cruiser disappeared from view, its flashing lights fading into the twilight, a profound sense of calm settled over my home. The air, once thick with tension and the clamor of conflict, now carried only the gentle hum of the evening. A symphony of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. The weight of the day, of the back-to-back calls, of the unforeseen confrontation on my own property, slowly began to lift. I walked to my porch swing, the familiar creak of the chains, a comforting sound, a simple pleasure I had yearned for throughout the long day. Easing myself onto the seat, I exhaled a long, slow breath that carried away the last vestiges of stress. I reached for the glass of cold lemonade I had prepared earlier, its condensation leaving cool rings on the coaster. The tart sweetness on my tongue was a refreshing contrast to the bitter taste of disrespect and entitlement I had experienced just moments before. I took a long, satisfying sip, letting the coolness trickle down my throat. The world outside my porch, which had been consumed by the drama of arrests and revelations, now seemed distant, a mere echo of a disturbance that had finally passed. My gaze drifted across my yard, now bathed in the soft glow of the porch light. The neighbor's yard, where the stolen umbrella had originated, looked untouched, peaceful. The quiet normalcy of my neighborhood had returned, a testament to the swift and decisive action that had been taken. I picked up one of my grocery bags, finally able to unpack the contents that had sparked such an audacious confrontation. The vibrant colors of fresh produce, the comforting weight of pantry staples, they were more than just food. They were symbols of the quiet domestic life that had been so rudely interrupted. As I began to carry the bags inside, the simple act of putting away my groceries became a meditative process. Each item placed in its rightful spot, a small act of reclaiming my peace. I thought about Karen's son, now undoubtedly sitting in a holding cell, facing the consequences of his actions. His entitlement, his misguided belief in his own impunity, had crumbled under the weight of the law. The raw racism that had oozed from his mouth, the casual disrespect he had shown, had ultimately led to his downfall. It was a stark reminder that no one, regardless of their perceived status or privilege, is above the law. I thought about Karen too, her desperate cries of being set up, her sudden silence when confronted with the truth of my identity. Her denial, her misplaced loyalty, had only amplified her son's problems. It was a difficult lesson for her to learn, but one that was necessary. This incident, while personal, also reinforced a broader truth about my role as sheriff. It wasn't just about responding to calls, filing reports, or making arrests. It was about upholding the principles of justice, ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, was treated with respect, and that those who violated the law were held accountable. It was about protecting the community, not just from overt criminal acts, but from the insidious undercurrents of bigotry and entitlement that can erode the fabric of society. My job, even when I was off duty and in my own home, was a constant responsibility, a commitment to maintaining order and fairness. The lemonade tasted sweeter now, the quiet of my porch more profound. The earlier frustration had given way to a deep sense of satisfaction. I had not only defended my property and my peace, but I had also, in a small but significant way, reinforced the principle that justice is blind and that no one is above the law. The cruisers were gone, the drama had ended, and finally, after a long and eventful day, I was able to enjoy my groceries in peace. It was a well-deserved moment of tranquility, a quiet victory in the ongoing pursuit of justice.